fighting is concerned, for us, the Cubans or the Russians have no right to kill Angola.
From advocating Angola's independence campaign against Portuguese rule to eventually challenging the ruling party in a terrible civil war, Savimbi's story is one of charisma, strategic alliances, and the complicated role of the United States. Throughout his career, Savimbi's acts echoed around the world, especially during the Cold War era, when his rebel movement received major assistance from the US. This video examines Savimbi's trajectory, from his ascent to power to the causes that eventually led to his collapse. From small town to big cities, Jonas Savimbi's life was shaped by a blend of personal upbringing, educational opportunities, and a fervent commitment to Angola's independence struggle. The Ovimbundu people were Savimbi's ancestors. He was born in Munhango, which is located in Ba province, and is a small town along the Benguela Railway in Angola. Lote, Savimbi's father, was a preacher and station master in the Evangelical Congregational Church of Angola. As a result, Savimbi's early values and feeling of community were profoundly influenced by his father's work. Savimbi was brought up in Chileso, which is located within the same province, where he obtained the most of his education from Protestant schools, even though he also spent some time in Roman Catholic institutions. Early on in his life, he was exposed to students from a variety of educational and religious backgrounds, which established the groundwork for his later academic pursuits and political participation. The scholarship that Savimbi received to study in Portugal was given to him when he was 24 years old. Despite this, he chose to become engaged with other students from Portuguese colonies who were actively preparing for anti-colonial resistance, rather than following the traditional academic pathways that were available to him. It was during this time that he made his first ties with influential individuals, including Agostinho Neto, who would later become the president of Angola, and was affiliated with the MPLA, Movimento Popular de Libertação de Angola. According to Savimbi, the increasing pressure from Portuguese authorities, in particular the PID, Polícia Internacional e de Defesa do Estado, forced him to seek sanctuary in Switzerland. Savimbi was able to establish his home in Lausanne with the assistance of communists from Portugal and France who were sympathetic to his cause, in addition to other allies. In that location, he was successful in obtaining a scholarship from American missionaries, which allowed him to further his education in the social sciences at Fribourg University. His time spent studying in Switzerland afforded him the opportunity to gain both intellectual rigor and international experience, both of which were essential for his eventual leadership role. Holden Roberto, a famous Angolan nationalist leader and founder of the United People's Army, was the person that Savimbi met in 1960 within the context of his time spent in Switzerland. Having already established himself as a powerful figure in the émigré community, Roberto endeavored to integrate Savimbi into the rapidly developing independence movement. A significant turning point in Savimbi's life occurred when he decided to fully commit himself to the cause of Angolan independence. This encounter marked the beginning of this commitment, following a trip to Uganda in late September 1960, where he delivered a speech on behalf of UDIAN, União Democrática dos Estudantes da África Negra. Savimbi's dedication became even more steadfast. While there, he made the acquaintance of Tom Mboya, who was instrumental in introducing him to Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. Under the influence of these interactions and conversations, Savimbi's determination grew stronger, and he formally associated himself with Holden Roberto's United Progressive Alliance. Savimbi and Roberto first met in Leopoldville, which is now known as Kinshasa, in December of 1960. After that, they proceeded to the United States. A series of overseas engagements that would characterize Savimbi's position in the Angolan independence movement began with this visit, which marked the beginning of the series. His participation in a variety of gatherings and conferences, including one that took place at the United Nations, served to highlight his rising prominence within the various nationalist organizations. The biography of Savimbi, written by Fred Bridgeland, includes a number of tales that are in dispute with one another regarding the precise date of Savimbi's official induction into the UPA. In spite of these inconsistencies, Savimbi's power inside the organization continued to slowly increase as a result of his diplomatic engagements and organizational initiatives. At the beginning of 1961, while Savimbi was still in Switzerland pursuing his studies, he was instrumental in the establishment of UNEA, União Nacional dos Estudantes Angolanos, where he served as the Secretary General. This group, which was connected to the UPA, had the objective of bringing together Angolan students studying abroad in order to show their support for the independence cause. The ability of Savimbi to think strategically and to negotiate effectively was a significant factor in the success of the Angolan nationalist factions in coming together. the culmination of his efforts brought about the foundation of Grey, governor of the revolutionary government of Angola in exile, in April of 1962. This alliance was composed of a number of different nationalist factions. In order to further bolster his credentials as a leader, Savimbi was appointed to the position of foreign minister inside this newly established government structure. Savimbi maintained a healthy balance between his academic interests, significant travel, and the obligations he had to fulfill in his organization throughout the early 1960s. He was able to successfully negotiate international forums and campaign for Angola's independence, which resulted in him receiving support and respect throughout the international community. During his time at Lausanne University, Savimbi displayed a pragmatic move toward legal frameworks and diplomatic techniques that are vital for the nationalist cause. He did this by altering his academic focus from medical studies to law and international politics. In his pursuit of Angola's liberation through a variety of channels, his multifaceted approach demonstrated his versatility and insight. The trip that Savimbi took from the countryside of Angola to the forefront of the independence movement is illustrative of his tenacity, strategic genius, and unyielding dedication to the liberation of his people. The military service. At the beginning of the 1960s, Jonas Savimbi endeavored to acquire a considerable amount of authority within the MPLA, Movimento Popular de Libertação de Angola, but he encountered opposition. Instead, in 1964, he joined forces with the National Liberation Front of Angola, FNLA, which was his political affiliation. Additionally, during this time period, Savimbi and Antonio da Costa Fernandes came up with the idea for the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola. Savimbi tried to get cooperation from China in order to strengthen the capabilities of the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola. He was successful in obtaining pledges of guns and military training from China. Upon his return to Angola in 1966, he officially started the United National Resistance Army as a guerrilla campaign against the Portuguese colonial regime. His career as a notable anti-colonial guerrilla fighter began with this event, which marked the beginning of his career. Savimbi found himself entangled in confrontations with both the MPLA and the FNLA during the volatile years leading up to Angola's independence in 1975. Both of these organizations were competing for leadership in the post-colonial era by competing with one another. In spite of the fact that the MPLA had first rejected him, it was later discovered through Portuguese records that Savimbi had engaged into a collaboration pact with Portuguese colonial officials against the MPLA. This exemplifies the intricacies of political alliances during this time period. After Angola gained its independence, Savimbi's military strength and strategic insight caught the attention of officials and intellectuals from both China and the United States. Savimbi, who had received his training in China and had a foundation in Maoist guerrilla tactics, deployed advanced military plans, such as the employment of several military fronts, in order to bait and face his opponents. Through the mobilization of the rural Ovimbundu people, who made up a substantial portion of UNITA's support base, Savimbi displayed his capacity to utilize ethnic and regional affinities in order to further his political and military goals. It was his leadership and military strategies that established him as a powerful figure during the fight for Angolan independence, and in following conflicts that molded the post-colonial trajectory of the nation. The brutal Civil War. Throughout the duration of the Cold War, Angola served as a battlefield where global powers engaged in conflict with one another by providing support to opposing organizations. Jonas Savimbi's UNITA, which had moved away from Maoist influences and toward anti-communism, was opposed by the Marxist-Leninist doctrine of the MPLA, which was supported by the Soviet bloc and had adopted Marxist-Leninist philosophy in 1977. The United States of America provided significant assistance to Savimbi's UNITA during the 1980s, particularly during the administration of President Ronald Reagan. With the help of influential lobbyists like Paul Manafort and organizations like Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly, which played a significant role in fighting for UNITA's cause, this support was made possible. The efforts of lobbying extended to the establishment of the Democratic International in Jamba, Angola, which is the stronghold of UNITA. The purpose of this establishment was to strengthen UNITA's military and political capacities in opposition to the government of the MPLA. One of the most influential conservative think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, was a significant contributor to Savimbi's ability to get UNITA off the ground. In addition to giving Savimbi strategic guidance and supporting his anti-communist position, key figures from the Heritage Foundation, such as foreign policy scholars like Michael Johns, made frequent visits to Savimbi in his distant camps. When Savimbi traveled to Washington, he had the opportunity to meet with President Ronald Reagan at the White House. This event marked the pinnacle of UNITA's worldwide support. The activities of UNITA were publicly praised by Reagan, who framed the organization's combat against the MPLA as an essential component of the global fight against communism. Through this endorsement, UNITA's morale was considerably boosted, and its international reputation was elevated. Savimbi was portrayed as a symbol of resistance against communism in Africa that was supported by the Soviet Union. By the year 1988, when the Angolan Civil War was reaching a fever pitch, Savimbi had made his way back to Washington, District of Columbia, to convey his appreciation for the unflinching support he had gotten from the Heritage Foundation and other conservative institutions. The centrality of Angola in the ideological confrontation that occurred during the Cold War was highlighted by this collaboration. During this time period, local disputes such as the one that occurred between UNITA and the MPLA were greatly influenced and controlled by rivalries between superpowers. During the time of the Cold War, Jonas Savimbi's United National Transitional Army and its alignment with the interests of the United States exemplified the worldwide struggle for influence and ideology. This struggle highlighted Angola as an important arena in the larger East-West War. Military and political efforts. In the year 1989, Jonas Savimbi found himself at the center of attention all over the world when he met with two members of the European Parliament. Savimbi was not just a military leader, but also a man of amazing intelligence and linguistic aptitude. He was able to speak 7 languages fluently, including Portuguese, French, and English, despite the fact that he had never lived in a country where English was the primary language. Because of his strong command of the English language and his profound intellectual capacity, he was a formidable figure in both the military and diplomatic circles. The biography of Savimbi provided a picture of a varied personality, including the fact that he was an unbelievable linguist, an avid reader, and an accomplished conversationalist. He became one of the most outspoken opponents of communism in the Third World, as a result of the fact that his lectures and discussions frequently delved into the political and social philosophy of the classical Western tradition. He was able to communicate with foreign diplomats and audiences, particularly in the United States, which won him a substantial amount of respect and support. This was especially true within conservative circles, who regarded him as a crucial role in the Western world's war against communism during the Cold War. It is important to note that Savimbi's image was not devoid of controversy. His political critics frequently characterized him as power-hungry and manipulative, even accusing him of turning to witchcraft against his opponents. This is a striking contrast to the image that he has built in the West. Savimbi's influence and impact on the Angolan conflict were apparent, despite the fact that these perceptions were diametrically opposed to one another. By the late 1980s, Savimbi had amassed a significant amount of military support from the United States. Prominent conservatives had championed his cause and provided a significant amount of military assistance. UNITA's capabilities and strategic position within Angola were strengthened as a result of this backing, which posed a strong challenge to the government troops that were supported by the Soviet Union. As a direct result of this, Soviet and Cuban forces were subjected to an increasing number of losses as UNITA established its control over significant regions of the world. With the exception of coastal cities and Namibi province, UNITA was able to demonstrate its proficiency in guerrilla warfare across the entirety of Angola by the year 1989. This was accomplished under the leadership of Savimbi, who was able to establish authority over numerous sections of the country. The year 1989 and 1990 was the pinnacle of Savimbi's military victory, as it was during this time that UNITA conducted attacks on government and military objectives in and around Luanda, the capital city. This strategic offensive indicated that there was a possibility of a shift in the balance of power in Angola, and analysts speculated on whether or not UNITA was prepared for a possible military win from this attack. The ever-increasing danger that Savimbi's advancements continue to represent was not overlooked on the international scene. Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, addressed his worries on the crisis in Angola during a number of summits between the United States and the Soviet Union. These summits brought to light the international significance of the fight between UNITA and the government of Angola. The diplomatic contacts of Savimbi stretched beyond the time that Ronald Reagan was in office. He met with George Bush, who succeeded Ronald Reagan as president, and he promised to continue providing support and help to the cause of UNITA. The Angolan conflict underwent a profound transformation as a result of Savimbi's strategic brilliance and military victories. the fact that he was able to successfully handle both military operations and diplomatic contacts propelled him to a prominent place in the international arena. The talks he had with influential Western leaders brought to light the intricacies of the geopolitical situation in southern Africa during the Cold War. The troublesome 1990s. Jonas Savimbi emerged as a central character during the turbulent years of Angola's civil war. He led the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola in a prolonged struggle against the forces of the government, which were supported by the Soviet Union and Cuba. The leadership of Savimbi was marked by both military prowess and controversy, and it was responsible for molding the history of Angola and attracting the attention of the international community. In 1990, Savimbi was confronted with serious obstacles on a number of different fronts. In spite of the fact that he had 2 wounds in armed altercations with Angolan government troops in the months of January and February, he did not let this dissuade him from continuing his attempts to strengthen support for UNITA. In the course of his trip to Washington, where he was scheduled to meet with American supporters and President George Bush, his resiliency demonstrated itself. Savimbi made an appeal for more military aid from the United States during these talks. He argued that the continuous backing of the Soviet Union for the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, MPLA, was a threat to the global cooperation efforts that were being undertaken by the United States and Mikhail Gorbachev's Soviet Union, respectively. In February of 1999, it became clear that UNITA was experiencing internal discord when Antonio da Costa Fernandez and Nzao Puna defected and publicly criticized Savimbi for prioritizing military operations above political negotiations. In spite of these failures, the Angolan government was compelled to negotiate a ceasefire as a result of the military pressure exerted by UNITA. Savimbi took advantage of the chance and participated in the presidential elections that took place later that year, which were regarded to be fair by international observers. On the other hand, neither Savimbi nor José Eduardo dos Santos, the president of Angola, were able to acquire the necessary majority, which resulted in the election of a runoff being arranged. In a tragic turn of events, the discussions for the runoff election ended in violence. Jeremias Chitunda, Savimbi's vice president, and Elias Salupeto Pena, his senior advisor, traveled to Luanda in order to determine the exact specifics of the situation. Their convoy was ambushed by government forces on November 2, 1999, and both of the guys were killed as a result of the accident. This occurrence, which is commonly referred to as the Halloween Massacre, was a defining moment. As a result of allegations of electoral fraud and uncertainties regarding the government's dedication to peace, Savimbi decided to withdraw from the runoff election and begin armed operations, which were mostly supported by sources from outside the country. Luanda, the capital of Angola, was rapidly surrounded by UNITA, which quickly gained ground. The attempts of the international community to mediate peace continued notwithstanding the strife there. UNITA and the government of Angola signed a new peace pact in 1994. This agreement was signed by both parties. On the other hand, Savimbi chose to continue serving in his current capacity within UNITA, rather than accept the vice presidency that was given to him. Regrettably, the tranquility did not last for very long. Savimbi, who had become disillusioned with the delayed implementation of the peace accords, resorted to armed resistance against the government in 1998, which resulted in the resumption of hostilities. As a result of these volatile years, claims of harsh reprisals and internal purges appeared inside the United Nations interim force. According to reports, such as those written by journalist Fred Bridgeland, Savimbi was the mastermind behind the assassination of individuals who were deemed to be dangers within UNITA. These individuals included his foreign secretary, Tito Chingunji, as well as Chingunji's family in the year 1991. Savimbi denied any involvement in the killings and blamed them on members of his organization who were considered to be dissidents. Bridgeland's accounts painted a more bleak picture of Savimbi's leadership during what he referred to as Red September. During this time, Savimbi allegedly oversaw the torture and execution of a large number of individuals, including his own officers and their families, in ritualistic killings that were linked to accusations of witchcraft. Savimbi's image as a charismatic leader and strategist in the struggle for Angola's independence was starkly contrasted with the cruel and dictatorial features of his reign, which were brought to light by these stories. On top of that, Bridgeland went into depth about the horrible end that befell Aurora Catalio and her small son. According to reports, Savimbi ordered them to be burned alive on the grounds that they were accused of practicing witchcraft. Savimbi's reputation was tarnished both domestically and internationally as a result of these occurrences, as well as others, which highlighted the dark and violent undercurrents that ran through his leadership. The sad demise and legacy. The tragic death of Jonas Savimbi occurred on February 22, 2002, in the province of Moxico in Angola. which is also the place where he was born. A life that was distinguished by unrelenting armed warfare, survival against several assassination attempts, and a larger-than-life persona in Angola's political scene came to an end with his passing. His death marked the completion of a turbulent existence. It is a testament to Savimbi's ability to elude capture and continue leading UNITA against the Angolan government that he survived more than 6 attempts on his life from the beginning of his career until the end of his career. He was a character that was revered and feared both, and he was renowned for his charisma and his ability to strategize, in spite of the fact that he was identified as dead at least 17 times during his existence. Savimbi always managed to reappear, which served to bolster his aura of mystery and his defiance against his foes. As spectacular as Savimbi's life was, the circumstances surrounding his passing were equally so. During a furious struggle with Angolan government troops along the riverbanks of Mexico, Savimbi was shot 15 times, causing him to receive injuries to key portions of his body, including his head and throat. He fought back with all his might, despite the fact that he was injured, but ultimately succumbed to his wounds and passed away practically instantaneously on the battlefield. A great number of Angolans, who had become accustomed to receiving false claims of his death over the course of his life, originally expressed their doubt when they heard the news of his passing. Any uncertainties over the unfortunate event were, however, put to rest when photographs of his bloodied body were shown on official television in Angola. This served to confirm the tragic tragedy. The burial of Savimbi in the Luena Main Cemetery attracted both devotion and controversy, as it became the focal point of attention. Not only did his grave signify the conclusion of an era for UNITA, but it also provoked discussions on the legacy he left behind in Angola's tumultuous past. Vandalism was committed on his tomb in 2008, which resulted in the arrest of youth members of the MPLA. This incident highlights the fact that hostilities between followers of the MPLA and UNITA continue to exist even after his death. The grave site of the deceased individual was desecrated, which brought to light the long-standing disagreements and unsolved grudges that continued to fester in Angola after the battle. As a result of Savimbi's passing, the leadership of UNITA was transferred to Antonio Dembo. Dembo took on an interim role, but he unfortunately went away as a result of wounds sustained in the same attack with which Savimbi had been murdered. This succession was followed by Paulo Lukamba Gatto, who led UNITA through a precarious ceasefire and negotiations with the MPLA just a few weeks after Savimbi's death. Despite the efforts that were made to calm the political situation, Angola remained deeply divided. Supporters of the MPLA and UNITA continued to compete with one another for political dominance and legitimacy. There is still a great deal of controversy and analysis surrounding Savimbi's legacy among academics and experts these days. While some people, such as Alex Vines from Chatham House, criticize Savimbi for his rejection of electoral outcomes and return to armed conflict, others, such as Paula Roque from the University of Oxford, acknowledge his charisma and leadership qualities. They also recognize his role in galvanizing UNITA as a symbol of resistance against what they perceive to be oppression from the government. The legacy of Jonas Savimbi continues to be extremely contentious. There are many who see him as a representation of the fight for Angolan independence and the resistance against foreign military involvement. Others will remember him for the crimes that were perpetrated while he was in charge, as well as the extended suffering that the people of Angola underwent during the Civil War. His complicated legacy continues to have an impact on the political landscape of Angola and serves as a cautionary tale about the human cost of armed war and authoritarian governance. Savimbi's personal life, in addition to his political pursuits, garnered a great amount of media attention. In spite of his public role as a revolutionary leader and politician, he went on to leave behind a number of spouses and a significant number of children, which is a reflection of the intricacies of his private life. To a large extent, the life and murder of Jonas Savimbi are emblematic of the turbulent history of Angola, which has been marked by military conflict, political division, and rival views of national identity. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more.